Welcome everybody. Sorry for the little delay to our fourth meeting of Bright Garden Voices. Bright Garden Voices is a project that intends to provide a platform for constructive dialogues between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. Some of you might already be familiar with our methods. We have these Zoom meetings with audience where we, the guests, ask some questions to our, the host, ask some questions to our guests, and then also the audience can interact with the guests and with each other as well. This meeting is recorded and will be made available online on YouTube and as a podcast as well. This project is started by three enthusiasts for peace and dialogue who want to build bridges between Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and we have no funding or links to any organization or government for this project. Our meeting today is about women and patriarchy. We're asking ourselves, what's the state of women's rights in Armenia and Azerbaijan? How does the patriarchy impact both societies and the conflicts within and between them? We're going to introduce our guest in just a second. So first, let me introduce myself very briefly. My name is Diego Ardoan. I'm from Argentina. I'm one of the co-founders of this initiative, which started, in my case, because I've been always interested in Armenian studies. I focused on them during my geography studies. And yes, that's me. So I would like, Arnold, if you can introduce yourself. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. First of all, a very happy Easter to everyone who celebrates. I am Arnold. I am Armenian, and I am joining from the United States. I am only a moderator in this program, and if I express any views, I am only representing myself and not any nation or group or organization. And I'm one of the co-founders with Diego and Aidan. The wounds and losses of this recent war are still very fresh for both sides, especially Armenians. And on top of that, there is also the POW situation. It is not in spite of all of this, but in my opinion, because of this difficult post-war situation, that ordinary people from both sides deserve to have their voices heard. Aidan.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our fourth meeting. Happy Easter to those who celebrate. My name is Aidan. I am from Azerbaijan. Today, I'm here as one of the moderators of Bright Garden Voices because I believe that it is important for the regular people in both Azerbaijan and Armenia to have their voices heard and to listen to each other. All opinions that I might express are my own, and they don't aim to represent any group, state, or organization. The topic of today's meeting is near and dear to my heart because today we will be talking about women and patriarchy. Being a product of Azerbaijani society, I am personally affected not only by the Karabakh conflict, but also by the patriarchal nature of our society. Both have contributed to monumental feelings of injustice in me and shaped me as a person. As an Azerbaijani woman and feminist, I am acutely aware of many boundaries and restrictions put around women in our society, and I have been fascinated by the fact that a similar picture exists in Armenia. I am extremely excited and curious about today's discussion. So without further ado, let me move on to Arnold for the agenda.
So each of our meetings will generally have two guests, individuals who are in some way involved with matters relating to Armenians or Azerbaijanis. We have already introduced the topic of today's meeting. Next, we will have a discussion with our wonderful guests. After this, we will open the virtual floor to the audience for questions. You will forward your question as a private chat to Diego. Some of you may have already written to us in DMs and sent us your questions. If you have your camera and microphone turned on, we will unmute you to ask your question yourself. You may also use your first name or a pseudonym if you prefer. We will end the meeting with a few closing remarks. And lastly, the meeting will be recorded and made available online. Aidan?
House rules. So as you can see on the screen, we have some basic house rules for these meetings. We ask you kindly to respect them. In short, we don't tolerate any insults, disrespectful language, generalizations about any ethnicity, denialism of trauma or events. We call you to empathize and not to accuse. Every participant is the only one responsible for what they say, and they're not here to represent their government and nation. Remember, we are not here to agree with each other, and it's more than okay to disagree. We're simply here to listen to one another, and we have a new house rule, which is, well, let's avoid whataboutism. On this note, I'm going to introduce our first guest for this meeting. I'm going to introduce Anna Shahnazaryan. Anna is born and raised in Sevan. Currently, she's based in Yerevan. She's been engaged in environmental and feminist activism in Armenia for over a decade. Her key political concerns are all forms of exploitation, which neatly coalesce in the current heteronormative capitalist patriarchal world order. Having struggled on the field against resource extraction and environmental degradation, Anna has come to realize how closely interrelated the exploitation of the earth and female bodies are. While the latest brutal war in Karabakh has shown that the male bodies are disposable too. Anna is an optimist and does her best to sustain her efforts in subverting the vicious cycle of exploitative systems. Her activism includes direct actions and discourse change. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
Our other guest is Zümrüd Jalilova. Zümrüd is a diversity and inclusion advisor and a project manager. She is the co-founder of Gender Talks, which is a social learning platform on Facebook. Zümrüd holds a Master of Science degree in Gender and International Relations from the University of Bristol. She took part in an internship with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or UNECE, in Geneva, and she is the winner of the UK Social Impact Alumni Award for 2019. Zümrüd is an incoming Schwarzman Scholar and is the founder of the startup Unpuzzle, a jigsaw puzzle on gender equality. Anna and Zümrüd, it is a pleasure having you with us today. Let us go to Aydan for the first question.
All right, so our first question is, let's go for you, Anna. To you, Anna, what is the activism that you're involved in? And otherwise, what's your platform or your activism trying to achieve?
Thank you very much. I really want to applaud your efforts as a grassroots initiative, and I'm really happy that I'm invited to speak within your initiative. Before I start with a question, I want to emphasize how important it is for me to acknowledge the condition we actually speak from, which partly you did in your introduction. But I want to acknowledge that I speak from a place with heavy trauma, where females that are close to me and not close to me live through an incredible pain of both human losses, but also the pain of being displaced, the pain of having displaced family members, being in disdain, and I kind of acknowledge that I'm related to this whole condition, and all of my speech, all of my formulations come from a structural condition, which I want to acknowledge. And I also understand that this structural condition is shared across the border, and maybe with Zümrüd. As to the question, I mean, thank you for introducing short kind of biography of mine. As it was mentioned, I am both an environmental and a feminist activist. And for me, even though in my past I have been in both different and separate actions and protests and campaigns, but I would say that environmental and feminist activisms have gone hand in hand in my personal kind of approach and life, even though Of course, with the feminist struggles, I have been more and more surrounded by actually people who and women who identify themselves as feminists, which is to a lesser extent true with environmental activism. I want to say that, well, first of all, of course, I have been and am continuing to be a member of various groups and various initiatives, but I don't represent them at the moment, and I would not like to speak about, speak on their behalf, or but I will speak about some of the things that we did together, as much as I avail myself the right to do so. And so with my activism, how it has looked like, especially over the past decade, it has looked like more of a feminist disruption of the dominating orders. And that has included a lot of direct actions. That has included both protests, shaming and blaming politicians, patriarchs who did awful, horrible things publicly to women and said things like that. It has included a lot of publicist work or publicist kind of efforts, writing articles, both in mainstream media, which is really not mainstream, because for me, even the online media or online newspapers are considered somehow mainstream, but I want to emphasize that we as activists don't have so much access to the real mainstream, which is like nationwide broadcast TVs or nationwide print media. So anyway, by saying mainstream, even I imagine some of the internet media that has been willing to publish my articles or even collective texts that were written where I was part of the groups. That has included participation in making a lot of also direct materials that have a direct access or outreach, which includes leaflets and zines and stuff like that. So one way of also disrupting the kind of the order, the patriarchal or dominating orders, has been through language, which I'm keen on because I also, by profession, am a translator. So I also use translation and I use language as a means to disrupt disorders and to counteract patriarchal language and patriarchal manifestations in speech and written language. Well, I would like to stop here.
Thank you very much. And Zümrüd, to you, our first question is the same. So what kind of activism are you involved in? And what you have a platform, what is your platform trying to achieve?
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for having me, and happy Easter to everyone who's celebrating. I also think that this sort of platforms are extremely important. They're vital for the generally for people to have a safe space and come together and hear each other and learn from each other and try to empathize for each other. It's probably the foundation for the future, regardless of what the governments of both countries envision. So, and that being said, I'm also sort of environmentalist, but not to the degree and level like my colleague Anna probably, very much on personal level. I'm also fighting for environmental justice, doing my best to reuse, recycle, reduce, upcycle, etc., and raise awareness among friends, colleagues, relatives, and everyone around me, and using, of course, the platform that we have, and defining myself as an intersectional feminist. I sort of also relate to what Anna said, and of course it's an interrelated issue, and we also try sometimes to bring it to attention of our audience and group members. And that being said, so this group developed sort of to also serve as an online platform to provide people with a bridge that will help them to exchange their opinions, information, news around the world about feminism, about gender-related issues. Obviously, the aim is to break the stereotypes, to help people to understand what gender equality entails and what does it mean overall, because one of the huge issues and gaps in Azerbaijan is misunderstanding or not really knowing what the concept is, what feminism is, and there's also quite a lot of misconception and misleading conversations around the topic in the country. So Gender Talks, along with other feminist platforms, try really to promote the right discourse, so to say. Well, I wouldn't say right, but sort of the most inclusive discourse possible for people to understand the topic better. So yeah, I think I sort of answered your question probably, but I could add possibly the fact that we're also trying to, so we have, well, I'm sort of coming from, well, I've tried to work in the academia, so I taught gender studies in at Baku State University for almost 3 years. And I wrote a few articles, obviously targeting Azerbaijani audience to reach out and deliver some important messages and issues. And that being said, I always try to sort of raise awareness among people, trying to refer them to the literature, to reading the books, because I can only deliver the top of the iceberg. People really, if they want to understand the topic, they really need to do their own research. They really need to read, educate themselves. Activists do their best to sort of to bring this to their attention. And it's already up to people really to continue with this research and understand for their own well-being, of course, and for the well-being of their compatriots and community. So yeah, probably I'll keep it short for now, but we'll continue. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Zümrüd.
All right, let us go to our next question. And first I will go to Anna. What state is gender equality at in Armenia? And what are some of the biggest obstacles and challenges in the struggle for gender equality?
Thanks for the question. Quite honestly, when you as organizers shared the questions with us beforehand, I was thinking, okay, what is the attitude towards preparation for these questions? Am I supposed to act as an expert, and am I supposed to kind of like dig in, articles and bring in statistics and talk with numbers and use this kind of the well-worn kind of cliches of presenting equality issues like women's representation in the politics or in the executive government, or women's participation in this or that decision making, or equal pay issues, or issues of domestic violence and numbers of women beaten up or killed per year. And then I thought, I don't want to do that. I really don't want to go into describing the condition of women in terms that normally, especially now with a sort of changed government, even the government officials and patriarchs themselves would do. I don't want to speak about those terms or in those terms. Yes, there is subjugation and subordination of women in Armenia. And that is expressed predominantly in how women are used and exploited as bodies. So I want to actually emphasize this moment, not really, all these political and economic terms, but how females are seen not as actors and autonomous owners of their own, let's say, bodies and their own fates, but they're always viewed as mothers and sisters and aides of the males. And being a mother and sister and an aid was especially well manifested, demonstrated in the 2018 popular uprising in Armenia, which of course was predominantly I don't know, that's because of the population that is female, or because it's really the courageous and creative force that is behind women. Really, the popular uprising had this predominant presence of women, but they were recognized only as, oh, let's just say and applaud and say, thanks to the women, our mothers or sisters that have been helping our revolution, which is something that was articulated from the podium on those days. And I want to express my extreme criticism of this expression and of this position where females and women are not viewed as anything other than a sister and a mother. That of course leads to all sorts of other subordinations of women, but particularly the point that I wanted to mention, their exploitation of their bodies, and they're seen as incubators of a population, but particularly in the militarized society we live in, it's really an incubator for the army. So women are very much viewed as the mother of the army nation, and army nation is a concept that has been very much been criticized by many people, but especially the feminists, and of course that has resulted in a huge backlash both against these individuals and women in general. So women are subjugated also in the home, and so this has also given rise to various manifestations of, let's say, struggles for women's rights. And of course, I have probably space to speak about it, about the feminist movements, but I just want to say that in many situations where we have a criticism of the patriarch at home, the dominating brutal male in the family, what is not seen and what is not criticized enough is the patriarchal state, the patriarch in the form of the state that sits above, everyone else, and that, many people who claim to be feminists see a lot of solutions and a lot of resolution of the female problem in the state, in the state structures, or in the state policies, or even the police that is supposed to save the battered women in situations of domestic violence. So women continue to be subordinated in Armenia, and there are huge obstacles which are also manifested in the dominant and hegemonic ideologies, and the dominant and hegemonic ideologies of neoliberalism, this, open market economy, and liberal ideas of what is so-called the women's emancipation, actually go and clash with the reality that these ideologies do not allow for, real women's emancipation, because the ideologies themselves imply exploitation. And so there, the female bodies, female labor continue to be exploited.
Thank you so much, Anna. Let's go to you, Zümrüd. What state is gender equality at in Azerbaijan? And what are some of the biggest obstacles and challenges in the struggle for gender equality?
Thank you so much for your question, Arnold. And it's quite interesting to listen to my colleague Anna and hear about the struggles in Armenia. And I would say, obviously, we have a lot of similarities and a lot of similar issues going on. And I would probably highlight that gender equality hasn't been achieved, obviously, and it's not even close to being achieved any soon. But there are quite a lot of efforts done at different levels. And well, I would probably start my sort of answer with mentioning that the society is designed or crafted or basically with a belief that it's very much designed with an idea of masculinized dignity and feminized sacrifice to sort of sustain the nationhood. And that being said, we have a very popular phrase, which is milli değerler, milli mentalitet. People quite often refer to this phrase, saying there are national values, national mentality, which is basically very much gender specific. And as I said, it's defined in this masculinized and feminized ways of dignity, sacrifice, etc. That being said, there are quite a lot of structural and systemic, obviously, inequalities in Azerbaijan, and that contributes on its own to a lot of inequalities based on gender. It's the approach to gender equality is very much binary as well. Sort of it's particularly women and men. Even there are some positive insights or highlights that I would like to mention. We do have quite a few laws. We passed the law on gender equality based on sex, so to say. The law has been passed in 2006 after Azerbaijan joined the CEDAW Convention, basically it ratified the convention. It's a convention on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and that on its own, after 1995, contributed to passing this law. Right after this CEDAW Convention also contributed to passing the law on prevention of domestic violence in 2010. And that being said, there are quite a few positive sort of efforts and achievements. It is achievement, in my opinion, humble opinion. And subjective opinion, of course. But that being said, of course, the implementation has been very poor. We saw very little progress and achievements, but despite this laws being passed for a long time. We also have a very interesting approach to sort of monitor or achieve gender equality at different levels in the state institutions. We have this gender focal point system, so women's machinery, which sort of has been in order for 18, 19 years, but unfortunately hasn't been functioning, hasn't been effective. Of course, I recently had, I was quite lucky to be part, in a small increment, sort of be part of the project, which was actually about developing resource pack for this gender focal point, so that they will start understanding what gender equality is, so that they can apply this knowledge and skills, so that they, do their work basically. And that being said, we saw quite a huge, obviously, gap in when we met with those people, when we had meetings, trainings and everything. And I think some efforts and first steps have been made. But again, we see very little consequences or progress after those, efforts and steps. So hopefully, within short period of time, maybe we'll see some good results. But and that being said, I'm coming back to the question, which was about obstacles rather than sort of positive sides in a way. It is also an obstacle that again, because it's a very patriarchal society, these sort of efforts and steps are not effective, even though they're made, and they're made because again, the approach is very sort of primitive. It's women and men are equal. That's what law says. There is no discrimination based on sex, according to the constitution of Azerbaijan. But then de facto, we see quite the opposite picture, unfortunately, and it's very much, sorry, I'm trying to sort of articulate it in a way so that, you know, people can picture what's going on better. So basically, we see the opposite because, not because there is no willingness to see it, but because there are, as I mentioned, structural and systemic inequalities. So that contributes a lot, you know, to failing really to achieve some sort of equality based on gender. And as I said, it's very much binary approach. We have quite a lot of issues talking about LGBTQI community rights, and we haven't signed Istanbul Convention, obviously, for many other reasons. And to be very fair, there are, again, because we have quite a lot of issues about domestic violence and violence against women and gender-based violence in general. Sort of a lot of people started, like you can see in the picture, we have activists, feminists who protest, uprise, and really demand nowadays some really serious, effective steps from the government, because the number is just going mental. It's too much, and it has been always too much, but at the moment it's a peak of emotions as well. So it's sort of, people are very much done with waiting and you know, expecting some transparency in that sense. And also apparently I've talked to some other feminist colleagues, and apparently there's quite a huge problem with working with police as well. But on the other hand, for example, working with shelters, I hear some positive notes as well. They mentioned that police really cooperates with them, really helps them. But again, it's just a bit of a, you know, it's a bit of a both. So yeah, and that being said, probably I will continue talking, elaborating, but hopefully I managed to touch upon some of the things.
Thank you, Zümrüd.
All right, for the next question, it's actually what we've touched upon already quite a bit, but maybe it's good to elaborate. So how would you say, Anna, does the patriarchy actually manifest itself in the culture and society of Armenia?
Because patriarchy is so omnipresent, the right question would be, what are the few ways patriarchy does not manifest itself in the culture and society? Because that would be that would be really easier to answer. I'm totally stuck on this question, because in this situation, the utmost and true manifestation of patriarchy has been and continues to be the war, and the brutal condition and the brutal manner of the war. No war is less brutal, but this particular one about half a year ago, with its intensity, with the ease by which it was waged. I mean, I don't speak about the military combat. I speak about the ease by which the Armenian society and Armenian diaspora has actually thrust itself into the battleground as a sacred thing to do. That's how patriarchy manifests itself. Patriarchy manifests itself by the thousands of the graves we have as a result. It manifests itself by the deep trauma of many people, including not only mothers as female population as a direct victim of this manifestation, but also male population, fathers of people that were lost. I don't know how to speak about this, because patriarchy manifests itself in this most brutal form of violence, which is war. And so it's a militarized society where everyone is supposed to contribute, participate, and wage that war. And that's how also I describe the major problem for women is nobody speaks amongst the women's rights about the woman's right to say no to war, about the woman's right to object any action that leads to war or uses her as participant of the war, which in the Armenian case we have seen during the war. We have seen a huge mobilization of people, the so-called home front, you know, how active the home front is supposed to be, you know, children, anyone, you know, women and other men that were not on the battlefield, building something for the battleground. I don't know, protective covers or food or collecting whatever materials. And that is how patriarchy manifests itself in the society. That's how every single person is driven, is ushered into violence, that being war. So yeah, I don't know. I'm quite overwhelmed by the situation, and I'm quite overwhelmed by that form of patriarchy.
Thank you, Anna. So the same question to you, Zümrüd. How does the patriarchy manifest itself in the culture and the society of Azerbaijan?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now? Sorry,
We can,
Yes.
yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. So yeah, I would say obviously the primary power is held by males as such, and it can, you know, this supremacy can be shown up in at every level: workplaces, organizations, policies, laws, business management, religious institutions, state governance, etc. So it shows itself in every aspect of life, at every level of life, and it's as I've already mentioned, it's patriarchal society, and it is defined by certain, you know, ideas that are masculinized and feminized, and the language that is used is very binary as well, and it is well, fortunately some things are changing, obviously. Like if you compare Azerbaijan with 10 years ago, quite a few things changed on the, you know, in the social life of the country, but you know, the issues are the same. It's, you know, the same old sort of mentality, outdated sort of mentality in terms of where women should be, where men, what women is supposed to do, what men, what are the roles, blah, blah, blah. And that being said, also the patriarchy also shows itself in actually, given that you showed the photo from the very popular Azerbaijani magazine Molla Nasreddin, in the preferences of males over females when it comes to sex selective abortions as an issue, as a huge, in fact. Obviously, it comes also from the meaning that we put in, you know, in the sexes and genders of this people. Obviously, a boy is a protector, is a backbone, is a foundation of the family, compared to a girl, which is actually, there's a phrase, as she would, you know, she would eventually leave us, sort of, you know. And that being said, in this war situation, obviously the preference of having boys as the protector was also sort of dominating. And I'm not sure if you can hear me, because on my computer you just paused. I hope
we can hear you.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, as I said, it's everywhere. It's dominant, and it brings with itself quite a lot of burden for women in particular, because we're talking about women as such in this meeting. And but at the same time, that being said, obviously. Women are not alone in this fight against patriarchy. We all very well know that patriarchal societies, you know, oppress both women and men as such, if we talk about, you know, in a very primitive way. But any gender anyone who has different gender identity or sexual orientation is very much oppressed in the patriarchal society, because again, there are certain ideas that maintain the idea of nationhood and national sort of, values and stuff. But I would like, on a positive note, for example, talk a little bit about this monument that we see, which actually, it's very interesting that, for example, my colleague Anna talked about this monument in Armenia, and it's quite a challenging sort of, monument, and it's quite challenging to talk about it as well, because you can interpret it in a very different ways. And I think Anna very well sort of elaborated the approach of feminists in that sense. And in Azerbaijan, we do not have this kind of monuments. Instead, we have like monuments that show sort of some sacrifice, like for example, for Jali massacre, we have a woman with her baby in her hands. So it's like it's sacrifice, it's womanhood that is, symbolized in this monument. But this particular monument is called Azad Qadın Heykeli, a monument to free women, and that monument is a pride of every probably feminist in the country, including myself. It's a huge inspiration for all of us. It's a huge sort of symbol for all of us, both for women and men of the country, so to say. And it basically has been made by Fuad Abdurrahimov, who put this monument after Jafar Jabbarli's opera play called Seville, which symbolizes basically freedom of women. And it's the first woman allegedly who took off her hijab, her cover. And that in itself symbolizes basically freedom of women, her right to, vote, her right to be educated, etc. So really having this motivates us a lot, and despite the level of patriarchy in the country, there are quite positive sort of historical cases that really help us to push the agenda further and forward. And that being said, probably I will stop.
I just want to add one more follow-up question, because I remember Anna talked in our pre-meeting to this meeting about this monument, and Zümrüd just sort of touched on this briefly. Maybe Anna, you can tell for the people who don't know what the monument is, like what it is, just to give a brief.
Yes, so this is the monument to the victory in the Second World War. It's called Mother Armenia. It's similar to monuments erected in other Soviet republics in the same period. Actually, all over the Soviet Union, I would assume also in Azerbaijan, monuments of victory in the Second World War were basically so popular. They were erected in almost every community. And so this actually stands different to most monuments that I've seen all over Armenia, because those monuments, they actually are either Soviet modernist kind of erections or strictly patriarchal columns, as big kind of penises as a symbol of a victory. This one stands erected in the form of a female who is strong and who holds a sword. There's a lot of narratives that I would equal to myths around the thought that was put into building and erecting this, all the interpretations of the sculptor's intentions. But what it looks like and how it's more popularly interpreted is that this is a symbol of a warrior woman. And this is how across the centuries we have seen, really from the depth of ancient times, a representation of women's worth in the culture or in the society. And that's, a woman is worth or worthwhile as long as she is a warrior together with her male partner, or together with a state, or together with a dominating group that has an ideal, and mostly that's an ideal related to either statehood or fighting against foreign enemies and invaders and stuff like that. And so, you know, this is neatly connected to, you know, how I described how patriarchy is manifested in the country. So even females and everything around women's existence and reality is really masculinized and is really presented as something masculine, or as, you know, something that is of this high value, so-called high value. So I would be one of the few people who would criticize this statue in Armenia for being a patriarchal manifestation, but it's also a nationalist pride symbol.
Thank you, Anna, for the context.
All right. And Anna, let's go back to you for the next question. Who are some iconic figures that have shaped feminism and or women's struggle in your society or for you personally?
Yes, I would like to answer this question as for me personally, because it's a difficult question to generalize on. For me personally, this is a poet of the late 19th century, early 20th century, that has been really unearthed in this post-independent period of Armenia through feminists, through artists, through writers and activists, who all in some way, you know, either collectively together or independently, separately, have popularized her name and her kind of her legacy from a different perspective than was to a little extent known in the Soviet times, because she's a person, she's a writer who was included in Soviet textbooks only because she was a proletarian singer, you know, a singer for workers' rights. But in the late 19th century, she was born in the 1870s, and then coming from a very impoverished family's background, and then growing up, you know, with her interests and self kind of education, mostly becoming educated in matters of oppression. Obviously, she was directly oppressed by the Tsarist government. She was born in Gyumri, and then she lived in different parts of the Russian Empire, including Russian cities, not only Armenian cities. And so she really vehemently opposed not only, you know, this kind of exploitative government, and spoke about the rights of the ordinary people, the workers, but she also spoke so clearly about women's rights and women's condition, and literally she sang. I mean, she, in Armenian, poem is often also called song. So I really see her as a singer, but not a very queer singer in a way, a singer who's not dramatizing, who's not making lyrics. She sings really revolutions. She really gives us huge power. There's one thing that I want to share from her, just to give you an idea of kind of the language she uses, but I want to also emphasize that, you know, a lot of what she was saying is so relevant nowadays, especially in what we have as failed socialism, the aftermath of a failed socialism and a huge tyranny, but also the beginning of a new capitalist, kind of old capitalism, but new capitalist order that has been established after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So a lot of the things that she says is so relevant, even a lot of the things that she criticized so strongly about objectification of women, or women being driven to wear this makeup and, you know, be obsessed with an external look or her appearances and stuff like that. So even those things are so relevant in our society, especially now. But what I want to say is that despite this feminist efforts, and that kind of connects to the next question, or one of the questions of how you know, feminists are perceived in the society, of course, with a huge backlash, with a huge counterforce, and a very, very powerful force. Just a few days ago, I think it was less than 2 weeks ago, one of the few symbols, which is, you know, a sculpture that actually epistomizes like a real person or a real woman, which was herself. And it was a tombstone with, you know, half of her body in the Pantheon in Yerevan. Her tombstone was stolen, you know, her actual sculpture was vandalized in a way. It was just disappeared. And this is how, you know, feminists are erased in a way. This is how, you know, patriarchy manifests again, you know, to erase something so important that has been in the past, I would say 10, 15 years, been popularized by many feminists, and especially, you know, independent feminists in Armenia. So with that said note, I want to continue with actually the living legacy, the living words that actually resonate in our hearts up until now, with just fragments. And this is not just one fragment. I will read first few sentences from her poem called "I Want to Live." I want to live, but not a lavish life, trapped in obscurity, indifferent and foolish. I want to love, unreserved, without a mask, self-willed like you, so that when in love, I can sing my feelings to the world and unchain my heart, a woman's heart. I want to act equal next to you as a loyal member of the people. I want to eat comfortably as you do from the same fair bread for which I gave my share of holy work. I want to fight first as your rival, standing against you with an old vengeance. Since absurdity and without mercy, you turned me into a vassal through love and force. Then after clearing these disputes of my gender, I want to fight against the agonies of life, courageously, like you, hand in hand, facing this struggle to be or not. For me, this is an iconic poem. Her poems, part of her legacy has been translated from Armenian into English, and this is again something that, you know, is a credit to the feminist effort in Armenia, and you know, particularly Shoshana Avakian, that published the translation of her poems. But back to this particular poem is just so dear to me, you know, in her socialist feminist language. And this is something that I so share, and this is something that I personally have vision for or struggle for. anyway, even though her sculpture has been erased, well, we don't know if it will be found or not, but I want to again give rise to her and to all, you know, the women who are, who the patriarchy is making efforts to raise, but cannot, because I do not allow that to happen, and a lot of other women do not allow that to happen.
Thank you for discussing this very interesting and inspirational figure, Anna. Zümrüd, let us go to you. Who are some iconic figures that have shaped feminism and or women's struggle in your society or for you personally?
Thank you so much for this question, guys. And Anna, I had goosebumps. I was feeling very emotional while you were speaking about it. And the poem is absolutely beautiful at all levels. And it's quite impressive that it's been written at that, you know, back in those days, and with such a determination and such a clear vision and message, and quite impressive. And it's extremely sad and extremely, you know, just troubling that this has happened to him, Tom, and I really hope that it will be found, because it's a huge legacy for you, obviously, and for women of Armenia. And yeah, and that being said, I think we do have quite a big legacy sort of in Azerbaijan as well, and it's quite interesting to see that despite this legacy, we do not have a big sort of group of feminists in the country as such, to be fair, and it's quite yeah, it's quite paradoxical, to be honest, because if you look back in the history, we do have historical figures that are absolutely, I mean, they're mental, they're so impressive, and few of those, I mean, for me personally, are Hamida Jamanshir, Leila Mehmetbekova, Shevkat Mammadova. So I'm going to basically very shortly tell about these women who can be inspiration to anyone, really, because these women were fighters, they were rebels, they were really the first of their own back then. So Leila Mehmetbekova is one of my favorite historical figures. She was the first pilot in East and Soviet, and in the Soviet from Eastern country, or Muslim country, so to say. So she and Zuleyha Seyidkhanova, they were, yeah, they were even preparing to go to war, which is a bit contradictory back then, in terms of, not contradictory to be honest, but like, yeah, they basically were willing to go to war and obviously fight. And unfortunately, Leila hasn't been allowed to go because she was also a mother of 5 children. And because of this ridiculous reason that she wasn't allowed to go, but that didn't affect her sort of willingness to continue what she loves to do and she's great at. She prepared 4,000 parachutists and opened her own school and really did quite a lot for her, you know, for her time. And she was also actually the first woman who would do sort of tricks with airplane in the movies. So in the first silent movie, she's the first woman as well. And you can see 2 of her photos here, one with the hat and then the other where she has short hair. In Azerbaijan back then, short hair was sort of a big step I done, a big message. And almost no women had sort of short hair. It was mainly long hair, which was a beauty of women, and obviously her dignity, chastity, whatever. And Leila, because she was in the school, she was told that, you know, women cannot fly. Also, her hair is an obstacle, blah, blah, blah. She went home and she told her husband and she cut her hair so that she can continue what she's doing. And that being said, she's sort of an inspiration to me because she was doing a very sort of non-traditional, she was having non-traditional career for women back then. And I think even now, this industry that she's sort of, you know, she's featured is very much male dominated at the moment as well. So we have very few female sort of students, pilots. I think we have maybe up to 10 girls max who are in the industry. So you can basically count on your fingers, which is, yeah, ridiculous. But yeah, so she, yeah, I think she's a huge legacy of Azerbaijani women, and she left a huge legacy. Hamida Javanshir, we have her colored photo here. She's the first sort of, and she's an extraordinary woman of her time as well. She was a very, very rich lady back then, and despite this, you know, her wealth, she did go back to her village after her husband died, and she was financing actually the Molla Nasreddin magazine that we previously saw. So she was contributing to this magazine, and she was also running a charity. So she helped quite a lot of people in her village and in the country when the diseases were widespread. So these women really inspire me personally. But I think anyone really. And in addition, I once Anna read something sort of some inspiring sort of poem. It came to my mind that I also have a note here from Hatice Alibeyeva, who was also a public figure in Azerbaijan. So she was also running charities, and she was doing quite a lot back then. And she basically has this interesting sort of opinion that I found. She said, if you don't mind, I will also read it. She said, одна из причин нашей отсталости – это то, что мы с утра до вечера занимаемся в кухне стряпнёй. One of the reasons why we are so left behind is because from morning until evening, we are basically doing the house chores and cooking in the kitchen. In the mornings, we are making tea. In the daytime, we're making lunch. In the evenings, we do make dinner, suppers. And then in the evening, we basically sleep in our own corner. So it's more difficult when you have kids. I'm sorry, sisters, but it seems like we talk too much, and it's time for us to get rid of this burden. And we need to learn, we need to educate, we need to both educate ourselves and others. So, and in the end, she says, «Сестры мои, пора проявить решимость». Sisters, it's time to show determination. So this sort of also short phrase inspired me a lot. I came across this this very recently, and I was quite impressed as well that despite having this, you know, quite a few women in the Azerbaijani history really fighting their ways and making their ways to the, you know, different industries, we still have huge gaps and huge male dominance in almost all the industries in Azerbaijan. And also coming to the sort of, you know, I know we're talking about inspiration, but I want to add up that in some cases in Azerbaijan, we don't like, I see that women are not passive. I need to be careful with the wording because it's a bit tricky to it's just in some cases we don't see women as passive victims, obviously, because they're part of this, you know, they are the product of this patriarchal society. So we see them also acting in the same way or doing things in the same way, which is not surprising in a way, because, you know, that's how they were taught, that's how they are expected to act. But at the same time, and that being said, I would like to mention that there is a huge misunderstanding of the feminism as such in the country, the concept itself. People who, you know, try to really mislead the community and mass in understanding the concept is quite, there are quite a lot of people who do that. And it's unfortunate that it's particularly difficult for us to promote these ideas because there has been already some shaped understanding or some shaped sort of opinion about feminist movement. But in the core, in the sort of nutshell, very shortly for those who might listen to this meeting of ours, I would like to say feminism has never been against men as such, or, you know, it's not a movement to destroy the families or destroy, you know, it's just like not that bullshit that people are talking about, honestly. Like, do your research, come to your own conclusions. But in a nutshell, it's for gender equality. It is against patriarchy, male domination as such. It's for for in diverse, inclusive societies. It fights for the well-being of people. So you really need to do your research to understand the concept, because it's not so black and white, and it's so primitive and simple to put it in 2 words or put it in 1 comment on Facebook or social media. So yeah, do your research, find your inspiration. Definitely go back to history and look at these historical figures that we have, huge legacy that we have. I think Soviet Union also played a huge role in women's emancipation, and maybe also the opposite. But we have the Soviet legacy as well, probably both in Armenia and Azerbaijan, that shaped this, women's position or situation in the country, or the way she's perceived and the way she's presented to people. And that being said, I think this whole, idea about women warrior and everything also comes as a legacy from Soviet Union, unfortunately. And that being said, I think, yeah, I've talked too much about a lot of things, so I hope I didn't confuse you all. But yeah, it's quite difficult to talk about those topics, in very small period of time, because it's quite complicated discussion. But yeah, it was about inspiration, so we talked about those. Let's continue.
Thank you, Zümrüd, for discussing this very extraordinary and inspirational women. Anna, let's go back to you. What insights do you have from your personal experiences working with women affected by the conflict, by the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict?
So I have a very direct participation and sharing the difficulty that the first-hand affected women were having, and that's the women in Karabakh. We have had an almost 90 or over 90% displacement of the peaceful population, including the women and children from Karabakh during the war half a year ago. And I was a host. I was a host to women, several families whom I basically did not know. I just want to say that the understanding and this kind of very humane burst into solidarity, into help, into really solidary action was prevalent during and after the war. And I just want to emphasize that while on a popular level, we actually have networks and systems of support. Unfortunately, these systems do not find their reflections in the ideal, which for the population, the ideal is the state. And so in state policies and state structures, we don't see the same kind of approach. We have a state that is representing itself as a tax collector from the population, but less from the businesses, as a regulator of sexuality, as a regulator of family, but never of working conditions or working relations or business exploitation. And so, I just wanted to just emphasize that, at a human to human, woman to woman, community to community level, we exhibit traits that are so important for survival, that are so important for being and living our humanity, which unfortunately are, not manifested in the so-called organized structures. I shared my flat with women who were escaping death. Her men, sons or husbands were left in the battleground. I had women who are double displaced. For example, a family who were who became refugees first in the 90s, fleeing from Baku. And it was something, you know, terrifying that, you know, she's like, I'm a refugee for the second time in my life. And, you know, those are really huge pains. And they, of course, they transfer, they come and I take them, I share their pain. They're back into, well, those that still have, you know, their houses, etc. They're back in Karabakh into an uncertainty. I hear them speaking from a very deep depression, from an uncertain despair for the future. So this is really very directly, but I also have experience of understanding the kind of way the livelihood of women particularly, but also generally in Karabakh. And I just want to say one thing, which again, I believe must be shared across the border. Women do not have a happy life in a militarized zone. Women in a militarized society. Women pretend to be happy, pretend to be strong warriors, but they really pretend, because when women speaking to me speak about their courage to stand up for their rights and to protect their land and house and stuff like that, speak with a very strong voice and speak with a very strong kind of emotion, I so see the suffering that is ingrained in their bodies. I see a body of a woman that has so many illnesses. She has diabetes, she has all sorts of, I don't know, other kind of problems that are, and then she says, you know, my health problems are because of the stress I live in. The stress, which is the fear, the stress, which is this extreme hard work that she has to do to maintain a livelihood in a closed territory, which is, you know, on many parts it's a war zone, but then it's also affected by internal monopolies and economic kind of injustices that are made internally now. So, and women who, again, are placed in these traditional roles of being mothers, giving to many children and sending them to the army. Women who are under a very big social pressure. There's all sorts of pressure to make them behave the right way, to be the right woman, to be patriotic, to not shun, you know, the war, not save her sons from the army, not migrate, let's say, to Russia or anywhere else, but stay in her land and endure, you know, the violences that they endure. There are systemic forms of violence that are exerted also by, you know, army officials and things that I know from, you know, personal research and experience, which never surface to a public discourse level. And because the latter, which is, you know, trying to survey the condition of women living on both sides of the conflict, I know because of this research that much of the situation is shared in the regions, particularly in the regions adjacent to the border with Karabakh in Azerbaijan, I mean.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing these insights about the painful experiences of women involved in this conflict. Let us go to you, Zümrüd. What insights do you have from your experiences working with women affected by the conflict?
Thank you very much for raising this important question. I would probably start my sort of speech mentioning that war is always ugly. It is always, it brings always tragics, losses, disasters. And of course, anyone who promotes war, anyone who really advocates or supports war should understand it consciously, should rationally accept it, should really be mindful about what they're promoting and what they want. And when both nations really wanted it, they get what they wanted eventually. And that being said, of course, I do share pain, losses, anger, all the feelings, all the shades of feelings that people are going through on both sides. I myself am from Ganja, and my family was in Ganja during the war. So I was, even though I'm not in Ganja, I wasn't in Ganja, and I wasn't even in Azerbaijan during the war. I was directly affected, sort of, so to say, because my family was there. My father was literally, you know, around the areas. And that being said, I do think that it's not only women who got affected. Obviously, everyone got affected, and everyone really sort of felt the pressure, but as well as also believed in the idea as well, because the nationalism and the discourse has been there all the time. And for many people, war was never over and was never even sort of not there, because I am now conducting a short research. So I've been invited sort of to analyze the research and write a report about how women got affected by Nagorno-Karabakh war in Azerbaijan, obviously only. And we're interviewing 30 women, and those women are journalists, mothers who lost their sons, wives who lost their husbands, war journalists, doctors, nurses, so range of, you know, different women. And most of them in their speeches, because we posed the question whether they did support their war leaders and whether they believed in this idea, most of them said yes, which is not surprising to me, but it is what it is. Most of them were absolutely devastated because we also had volunteers who worked in the field, and they were sharing horrible stories, horrible things with us. And you can see on a photo, like, lots of children died in this ugly war. And obviously it was not only the loss of the family, but the whole nation. Obviously everyone shared this pain, this loss, this, you know, tragedy. And up until now, I feel like one of the questions was also whether they would consider sort of, do they see the future with neighbors? Do they really envision it? And most of them were saying that not now, because obviously it's very fresh, it's very unfair in their opinion. And I've never worked directly with women, but as I said, I am sort of doing a post-war research with women who got directly affected by this war. So these are some of the insights that I wanted to share, but there are quite a lot of things that I can't share until report is sort of published or shared, if obviously interested in sharing. And that being said, well, it's not a secret that Azerbaijan had like 800,000 IDPs and refugees for 28 years. And I myself, I was born in 1993, luckily. And I didn't experience the Nagorno-Karabakh war, but I was sort of a post-war child. And we would see everywhere, you know, everywhere the sign of war, everywhere the sign of loss, everywhere the sign of pain. And it's quite stressful and depressing to grow up, you know, and overall to constantly be reminded about this, this sort of, you know, war situation. And that being said, again, what I previously mentioned, that, you know, it's not surprising that women didn't advocate against war, but for war, because it has been always there, it has been always reminded, it has been always sort of fresh in the minds and hearts. And I know that this is not topic of discussion now, and I've watched your previous webinar, so I think our colleagues from both Armenia and Azerbaijan touched upon these things very well. They very well described and elaborated on some very important matters. Coming back again to women and their position and situation, in this war, we surprisingly had a war journalist who was in the field. We surprisingly had quite a lot of women who were part of the medical support, and they were doctors, surgeons, nurses, volunteers, like basically all the women of the country stood up, which really sort of is an interesting way of seeing, comparing this, you know, first and second war and women's position and roles in this wars. So now women are more actively involved in the whole war process, but not as being directly warriors or fighters, but, you know, behind the scenes. And it's unfortunate that during that period, even during that period, while women were actively involved and really sort of trying to help and do their best, women were still criticized very much for being women and being sort of, not being women, but like being women who are not fighting, or women who are not, it was again, you know, again, the matter of men being so important, so vital to the nation, and women really not doing much to, you know, to not doing the same, not doing things at the same level of value and importance. And it's quite distressing, isn't it? It's like, if women do not fight, they still, you know, they have to fight in order to be acknowledged or recognized as active participants of this war, or active contributors, as, you know, to support or relief. I might also mention that it's very interesting that after Nagorno-Karabakh, after first Nagorno-Karabakh war, as I mentioned, we also, for 28 years, we had refugees and IDPs, and among those we have plenty of women and children, of course, and they were all placed in like terrible, they were living in horrible conditions, because obviously economy was terrible. Obviously 90s were terrible for everyone. I mean, you guys probably also remember growing up, you know, in 90s. Like, for example, even me studying, I remember in Baku, we didn't have accommodations because all the accommodations were filled with refugees and IDPs. And of course, government was building sort of houses, and some support was on the side, obviously. But then they didn't want to provide them with stable, you know, stability as such, so that people still remember that they have their homes back in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they will return to those places. You know, it was always reminded as well. And to be fair, people were always also keen, you know, with this idea. They were keen on thinking, I have home, like this is not my home, I will return. And that being said, well, why I'm mentioning all these stories is because I had an opportunity to speak to one of the sort of survivors, IDPs, and she told me that it's very interesting that the inheritance, or sort of not inheritance, but basically the government provides the families with the housing, or with a temporary housing, so to say. And when in the family, it goes to because we have patrilineal sort of system, in patriarchal and patrilineal, we basically, this house, after women of this house, or the girl marries, doesn't belong to her anymore. So in the system, basically, if the family gets the house, or temporary housing, apartment, or car, whatever it is, whatever property it is, once she gets married, and if she's the only daughter, let's say, in the family, she doesn't get it. And that blows my mind, because, you know, it's just so sexist and so unfair. And that is some very, very deep insight from Azerbaijan in a way. And coming back again to the situation with the current war and the women's situation in Azerbaijan, again, women, because of social media and internet, and not only because of that, but they were actively involved and they were active participants of this war, especially information war. And they were doing their best sort of to promote the ideas that government does, which obviously brings us back to the fact that they're also sort of following this patriarchal root system thinking. They were supporting militarism. They were very much, maintaining the idea of the nationhood and militarism. And even though they were criticized for not going to war, majority of women were showing willingness and their open statements that if allowed, I would go and fight. I would go and, be part of the war. And we did actually have one woman who died in the war. She wasn't actually a warrior. She was a nurse, but she was presented to society very much like she was a warrior, and she was sort of pride of the nation as well. And we as feminists were very much criticized for not really talking much about her. But that being said, of course, we do grieve for this loss. We do share pain of her family, but we do not support the discourse of presenting her and picturing her as a warrior in this war and sacrificing her life, which is the thing that we want for all women of our country. So it's not really the idea that we would promote. I would personally promote. I can talk only on my own behalf. So, and whatever I said within this meeting, it's all my subjective opinion, and it's also subjective within this period of time. It might change over the time, it might not, it's just like important for people to keep that in mind. And that being said, I think maybe others will sort of, ask us questions, and we will elaborate sort of and talk more about what people are interested in, rather than, me talking from my heart, anything that comes to my mind. So,
Thank you, Zümrüd, for sharing.
Sorry, Arnold.
Okay.
May I just jump in to add a few remarks to exactly, some of the points that Zümrüd was mentioning, because it just clicked in my, brain, and was like, okay, there's something that I've heard. Well, obviously we have this propaganda of enmity and the enemy that we should all fight, and that is for the Armenian nation, Turks and Azeris, and so, this is how, the enemies are perceived. What is interesting is that these patriarchal, militant, militarist men actually all the time, call anything they don't like, as being a traitor and serving the enemy. But they don't shun from actually resorting to using the enemy's practices. And I just want to say a few, horrible things that, some of, there were either politicians, the newly emerged opposition in Armenia, or, some warriors or political analysts. Well, first, in terms of, the refugee question, I remember hearing an analyst, maybe somebody from the military, I don't know, but they're, always so interchangeable, saying things like, what, the Azeri government did the right thing back in the days, they kept the refugees in, these conditions, and they kept the refugees, they didn't, integrate them into society, and they did the right thing. Now see, they're using it as a weapon. And for me, it was like, no, the continuation of his speech was like, and we did the wrong thing, in Armenia with the refugees that were not the same number, but were from, actually from the Republic of Azerbaijan, Baku, Sumgait, Ganja, all these other places. And so this analyst was like, we shouldn't have integrated them. We shouldn't have given them passports immediately. We shouldn't have allowed them to migrate. We shouldn't have accommodated them, And I was like, wow. So, when you have a system of violence, you can actually appropriate it from the enemy. And and it was just shocking. I just want to say that some of these things have been so shocking to hear. Another politician was, somebody who's calling Armenia's current government horrible names, including a derogatory racist slur, which is, calling somebody a Turk. So they're calling them these slurs, but at the same time saying, you see, there should be a military coup in this country. The military should take the situation in their own hands. You see how they did it so many times in Turkey. And I was like, well, the Turkish people are not happy about the numerous military coups it has had. And I mean, anybody who knows history or across the history across the border would understand how horrible that is. But why do we want to appropriate those horrible things? But see, what I want to say is that this nationalism and this propaganda talk is so fake. It can appropriate all sorts of things, what they call enemies, and be horrible. But I want to make another important important remark to what Zümrüd was saying, and that is kind of the narrative around the timing of reconciliation. And I just want to share a piece from my own, research of talking to women, and that was way before this war. It was probably in 2017, but it was in the aftermath of the escalation of 2016. So when I was asking women, when do you feel, ready to speak about reconciliation? I was hearing from numerous people the same narrative, which is probably around 100 years need to pass. And I'm still, surprised of where this is from. Why exactly? Why not 50 years? Why not just one generation, let's say 25 years? Where does this 100 years come from? And even though this is still a question mark in my head, I want to say that it hasn't taken not even a year for this platform to be created and for this talk to happen, which I'm happy for. Just wanted to share this.
Thank you for sharing that, Anna, and thank you, Zümrüd, for providing us these interesting insights about the experiences of Azerbaijani women, especially the painful ones. And for the last question, let us go to Aydan.
Right. Our last question ties back into some of the things we've discussed earlier, but it might be interesting to sort of wrap up with this. What is it like to be a feminist activist in Azerbaijan, Zuma, and how are feminist movements seen in your country?
Thank you so much. And I think I numerously mentioned how challenging it is to be a feminist activist in Azerbaijan, and it's, it has its own reasons. It has its own sort of challenges and factors that contribute to this, extreme obstacles. But that being said, I think that the movement as such was shaped relatively recently, so we are experiencing sort of, fluctuations, and we see some positive sides, some negative sides. There's criticism within the feminist community as well, and I do not represent all the feminists, of course, here of Azerbaijan, and I don't have to, and that should be also kept in mind of people, because feminist movement has its own sort of idea of smashing the patriarchy, but it can be done in different ways. There are intersectional feminists, liberal feminists, and I, to be honest, for a long time was liberal feminist myself, in terms of, until I discovered and learned more about intersectional feminism, and it became sort of part of my work and attitude and mindset and analysis. And that being said, I do think that a lot of women who do not actually call themselves feminists, they also are part of this fight, and they do make their own ways, and you know, they do try to really break this gender-based stereotypes. They just unfortunately do not want to be part of the movement, which can be really helpful, because we do need the unity of women. We do need the unity of people as such around the idea, because the idea really serves the people. And that being said, I do see that a lot of women, including myself, sometimes have to act within the limits that patriarchal sort of, you know, society and government allows us, so to say. So it's quite difficult sometimes to, you know, push the agenda or really be very open about some sort of ideas. But I personally, I mean, I was always challenged, but I never had sort of you know, backlash from people who I had conversation about what is gender equality, why it's needed, what is feminism, why I need to mention this or that, why I need to talk about the history of LGBTQI, why I need to, of course, like make it a part of my training or discourse. There's understanding. The more you talk to people, the more they understand. But because we do not have those talks very often, we have quite a lot of misunderstanding and you know, big gap. And that being said, I think feminist movement is actively growing and sort of progressing. We do have obviously quite a lot of backlash from the society and government itself, and you can, Aidan's background also shows one of the marches of feminists in the country. Unfortunately, I wasn't part of this march, but it was a big event. That there has been backlash. There's been clash of police and citizens, and it wasn't. Yeah, the outcome wasn't great. It was terrifying to some level. And second March, which happened this year, was very well sort of eventually presented by the feminists. I mean, not by the media, because they did have, for example, Gulnara Mekhtiyeva, who's part of the feminist movement in Azerbaijan. She's you know, she's very popular among feminist sort of groups, and she's doing quite a lot. She, for example, read her demands and requirements and the reason why they are protesting and marching. So that she managed to do, which is a great step, in my opinion, a great thing, because people should understand why this is happening, because a lot of people on social media just write, what does women want? What's their problem? Why they're unhappy with their lives? Why they're like, the society loves them, respects them. We, you know, we can't let our women, you know, to be strict women, that's how they call them, or whatever, you know, whatever ugly words they use to describe certain ideas that they can't really put together in a well manner. That being said, the movement still is there, and it's growing, and a lot of young people are part of this movement, which is amazing, because young people are sort of more informed, educated. They use internet actively. They use you know, opportunity to do research, to connect with others, to share opinions, to be more open-minded. But at the same time, it's only happening in the capital. Unfortunately, we do not see it across the country. A lot of we're still fighting with primitive issues like access to education of girls. You know, it's ridiculous, and we have still early marriages, child marriages going on. We have obviously domestic violence issue, and GBV itself is a huge obstacle in achieving gender equality, or just, you know, talking in a civilized way about gender equality, because still there's a lot of hatred against against the idea of women being liberal or free, or, you know, being her boss of her own decisions in life. So that is very much opposed, because again, coming back to the very first sort of discussion, it's a very patriarchal society. There's still supremacy and belief that men are the ones who should define, men are the ones who should decide, determine, you know, and govern, etc. Yeah, I will give obviously opportunity for my colleague to speak as well, but if needed, I will add later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zümrüd. Yeah, listening to this just makes me again really emotional. So Anna, of course, for you as well. So what is it like to be a feminist activist in Armenia, and how are the feminist movements seen in Armenia?
I think we will see this exactly after this video is published. I don't know how the extent to which comments will be moderated, but obviously you will get a feeling of what it feels like to be feminist and talk about the non-popular things, which is talk about non-nationalist things, non-sexist things, non-militarist things. There are all sorts of, let's say, ideologists and ideologies of feminisms and in Armenia. There used to be a time back in the days where, you know, this generalized idea of women's solidarity, female solidarity, being a unity, being a unified force was unifying many people. But then as time went by, as you know, ideological differences became even more stark, and for several reasons, you know, those can be really objective, some can be very, you know, just personal decisions. Fractions happened, and I can't say there is one unified movement, a feminist movement in the country. There are all sorts of feminist organizations and feminist groups and individuals who all do their part of as Zümrüd said, smashing the patriarchy. There has been internal clashes, especially, you know, those that some of us would criticize for being liberal and co-opted by the state or working with the state, which is partnering with the police, trying to reform them, etc., you know, so things that we don't believe in, you know, not that necessarily, you know, we want to criticize female colleagues, but we want to criticize the means by which they want to reach a particular end, which is, let's say, protection of women or improvement of their conditions. So there is a multitude of groups and approaches towards raising and achieving women's rights in the country. But I want to say that there is a big lack of more of a decolonial approach to both formulating a lot of things, you know, formulating objectives, formulating practices, formulating the situation, formulating the backlash that is so widespread, the patriarchal backlash, I mean, that is so widespread, the propaganda tools that are used. So there's really a very big lack of decolonial understanding. And there I so agree with Zümrüd, is like people need to do their own research and just Google. But, you know, a decolonial research is not at hand. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not even a propagated thing to do. A decolonial approach does confront both, you know, both what we would know as colonial, like big colonial powers, but also, you know, these transient structures, transient colonial structures. And in this particular case, when it comes to feminist movements and the backlash, they're so well represented in the media, in both the mainstream media, but also in the social media, and in all these tools that are used in this war against women, I would say. And so what is it to be like a feminist activist? One of the most difficult feminist activists would be the one who, like in this poster, is saying no to the nation and saying, I mean, this poster, by the way, has been so used and abused by nationalists in the country. You know, every single person, a woman who would be disliked by them or, you know, a particular group of nationalists would be considered to be the author of this poster. So this poster is really brilliant in the way that it just hits and has stepped on the feet of of this painful patriarchal emotions. Now, it says no to the nation, and a feminist who says no to the nation is actually confronting this totalitarian ideology, both the totalitarian ideology of nationalism as such, but also this totalitarian body politic, you know, which is considered the nation, on behalf of which individuals, but particularly women, are supposed to act, on behalf of which, on behalf of the nation, they either have to give birth, send to death, or give their free labor, or actually give their own lives. So to be a feminist activist who also is seen as, you know, very, very dangerous is one who says no to the borders, one who speaks about the peace, one who wants to clear the delineations that actually bring to enmity and the consequences, as we've seen with our own experience. A feminist activist that is so dangerous to these normative systems is the one that says no to the traditional patriarchal family system, the one where a woman needs to be somebody's wife, the one that needs to be somebody's spouse, you know, the one that needs to live in domestic violence and to endure domestic violence, both from the husband, but also from the family members. A really dangerous feminist is the one that actually says no to the state. It says no government, but it actually is no to the state. State as a is the ultimate patriarch, as the ultimate of regulator of sexuality and of family life. The one that says no to the master, to the Lord. In Armenia, there is an expression where it says, oh, what a poor woman, or what a poor person, she's left unmastered, Actually, there was a string of graffitis that actually occupied the city some time ago, some years ago, which said a woman is without a master. So a feminist who actually goes against masters, and that includes also the Lord in, you know, in the form of God, in the religious institutions, in whose name women are also subjugated in nowadays, but in whose name women have been brutally exterminated over the centuries. A feminist who says no to the kitchen, a feminist who says my boundaries are not limited to the kitchen, is dangerous. You know, it also resonates with a piece that quoted Zümrüd. Especially dangerous are the women who confront and who smash the organized hospital system, which includes psychiatric institutions, which have over the centuries and up until now, and right now, even in Armenia, up until now, are calling women hysterical. This absolutely sexist term, who limit women, who speak about their rights to being a mad, and therefore one that deserves to be placed in a madhouse. And the madhouse, both here in the poster and in the translation, is really, you know, this derogatory word, you know, nothing to do with mental health. So this kind of a feminist activist is utmost dangerous to the patriarchal normative system, and people, you know, people who use you know, symbols of this kind of activism, you know, real life women. I believe I would fall into one of them, who use these symbols for targeting them, for spreading all sorts of violent calls against them. Yeah, so it's a dangerous thing for them to be feminists like this, but for us to be a feminist like this is really an existential thing to be too.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your elaborate answer. And I think on this note, we are done with the questions that we came up with. Diego, do you want to take the stage?
Can I just add very shortly some notes?
Sure.
Yes.
I was just going to say, like, I forgot to mention that actually you put the picture, and it just like sparked in my mind that we, interestingly, we have now a feminist channel led by the person that I've mentioned, Gülnara. So they run a YouTube channel, feminist. It's called Fem Utopia, and they post videos about like how they see the issues in the country through feminist perspective and gender lens. And it's quite interesting. And they recently also posted this music video as a part of their protest. It's called Süpürge, broomstick, which is again referring to 8th of March, where they were basically the women who are sweeping the floors in Azerbaijan. And yes, we still have women who sweep the floors. So the women are the ones who keep the country clean. But among those, you can see men as well, old generation mainly. And that being said, a lot of women actually died in the car crashes, and because they're sweeping the floors and the roads. And obviously, it's very dangerous. It's not safety measures are not in place. So, and that being said, it was quite paradoxical to see how these women are opposing feminists who are fighting for their freedom and obviously equal rights and everything and safety. And the song obviously refers to this whole situation and case. Also, I would like to mention that if you look at the Azerbaijani case, it's very complicated in a way. It's not so primitive and, as I said, black and white. We do have, for example, interestingly, quite a few women in position, but again, because it's so patriarchal, I mean, male dominated, their participation, they don't hold the same influence as their male counterparts. So that's one issue. Another thing is that there are very few of them. Surprisingly, we do have for the second time ombudsman who's a woman, but again, as I said, she doesn't hold the same influence, I would say, but I might be wrong. It's just my subjective opinion. And we do have, for example, my good friends are running a great website called Femiscope, so they're really promoting sort of art. They're translating articles, they're encouraging locals to write articles. So these are some of the actions that feminists are taking, given the situation. And I do join Anna in mentioning that it's a very dangerous and risky thing to call yourself a feminist nowadays, unfortunately, in Azerbaijan as well. But hopefully with time, things will change. I mean, feminist movement in Europe and other countries also went through stages and phases of, different challenges. Hopefully we will also get over it and, be rational about the movement. So yeah, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Zümrüd. I personally, I thought it was, the broomstick was like this joke about witches, you know, like usually it's used also
And
to...
they've used witches as well, of course.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, so it is a double meaning as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. Now I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll go through the questions that we have. I know that we're a little bit over time. Sorry about it, it just was very interesting today. So we'll just go briefly through the questions. Just a second. Okay, so I hadn't had the chat open before, so I'm just seeing the questions now. So Celine, are you here still? Yeah, you wanna ask the question that you asked in the group? You wanna ask it yourself? Oh, you answered it, Zümrüd, as well. Okay, sorry about that. So the question was, are there feminist groups which work across Caucasus or keep in touch with other feminist groups in Caucasus? And Zümrüd, you answered. You want to say it out loud, maybe, because the chat doesn't get.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're aiming to collaborate. So you're more than welcome to contact with us, and we'll be more than happy to see how we could possibly collaborate or help or contribute in any way that we possibly can. And I know that we have quite a few groups who would love to be in touch with you as well. So feel free, absolutely, to be, to stay in touch.
Can I jump in on that question? Not because I have a very particular and specific answer, but I just want to give an example of experiences that have also, I would think failed, especially given the decades of so-called peace NGO work, which I don't want to blame the NGOs for the failure. I mean, it's absolutely not the NGOs that actually waged the war. But what I want to say is that there have been, especially around the peace issue, there have been Armenian and Azerbaijani platforms. I don't want to actually name them exactly because I don't have much information. Some of them were donor funded, and really a lot of donor or mediator work effort was made into making these platforms work. But I just have one personal subjective opinion about a lot of NGOs expressing not a very heartfelt approach to this issue, but actually doing more like, oh, what the state is not doing, then we will do. Or, oh, what the state does not dare to articulate, we will articulate. So a lot of, the NGOs have a state-centered approach. And I've heard a lot of people from Armenia being extremely offended from their colleagues from Azerbaijan who were so thrust into the war and used a very militarist and militant had a militant posture, and they felt so threatened by these kind of feminists, so-called, or peace builders who actually are pro-war. So what I want to say is that there have been quite a few experiences of trying to engage in common platforms, but unfortunately the ideology, the war rhetoric is so strong. The lack of I would call this also a criticism towards myself, this self censorship, and because we're so threatened, peace talk is so threatened in Armenia, but I believe in Azerbaijan too, that we also limit our efforts, we also limit our publicity, our public confrontation to the war rhetoric. That in a way we ended up what we ended up, which is Zümrüd, as she put it, if nations want the war, they get it, and they get it in such an ugly way. So there have been platforms that I think have not achieved their aims and have been dismantled, unfortunately.
Thank you, Anna.
But Diego, I'm
Sure.
so sorry to interrupt you. Just to mention, Caucasus is a huge region. I was talking particularly about South Caucasus, probably, because we can't go really to the whole Caucasus region. It's quite a lot of work, given that we're working voluntarily, and obviously we're committed. It's an aim, it's a goal, but I'm also sort of working on the side and doing it, as a part-time job for myself, because this is what I'm committed to. This is what's important to me. But that being said, I do think that there've been some. I mean, I do agree with Anna. Of course, there've been failures. Of course, there've been failed projects and efforts. But I do know that old dinosaur sort of organizations, they did try to communicate with each other. They still do, I think. And that being said, I think that through Georgia, of course, there are meetings of both Azerbaijanis and Armenians in particular, for example. That being said, I mean, probably I recently came across Frida organization, which is the feminist fund organization. They fund feminist groups and stuff, and most of you maybe already heard about them and know about them. So they tried to also bring together feminists in Georgia, from the I would say post-Soviet region, because there've been people from Ukraine, Moldova as well. And that being said, I think there are efforts and some probably successful collaborations, but of course challenges are also there, and I'm pretty sure a lot of NGOs failed some projects as well. I did hear I, for example, have never worked in that in that area, or I was never part of this project, but I know that, for example, there've been some projects like having camps and bringing together people, IDPs from Azerbaijan and Armenia, so that they had some safe space or platform to talk to each other and stuff. And that has failed, as far as I heard as well, because people still couldn't communicate in an effective way, because it was still very fresh for them what happened in past. And I think I'll just add later, but yeah, we are happy to see where we can possibly collaborate with some of the groups who are interested to come together. Again, South Caucasus, not the Caucasus as such.
Thank you, Zümrüd. Keeping that in mind about South Caucasus or former Transcaucasia, for the next question, it says the patriarchy in the Caucasus has a specific character. It is more regional than religion-based. Other books or research articles on this, like on the Caucasian patriarchy and the strategies to struggle for gender equality?
I do know that there is one edition of Cambridge that was developed by Cambridge Uni. It's unfortunately, I do not remember the name, because I was part of it. I gave my contribution. I will find it and definitely share it with you guys so that you can share with the participant. But I think Chaykhana is a great platform that posts sometimes quite good articles about basically patriarchy in Caucasus, or Caucasian patriarchy as such. I have quite a few articles. Maybe you could check. I'm not sure if I touch upon Caucasian Caucasian patriarchy in particular, but it definitely has some elements of this subject. And that being said, I think there are few books probably out there that I know are in Azerbaijani. If I find their translation or anything, I will definitely share it with you. And of course, you can see probably some of the things in the reports of the UN, UNFPA or UNDP, probably in both of the countries, some information that you can obtain or get.
Yes, there's a comment that says that the Caucasus edition has quite a lot of articles, and I would refer to this magazine journal. But I want to again reiterate that the Caucasus is such a huge region, and that includes parts of nations that are under the Russian Federation, and and there's really religious components there, and even the religious component is not homogeneous. It's all sorts of, you know, it's even branches of Islam, you know, that are different. And yes, there is a comment there that says that the Swedish organization Kvinna till Kvinna works in, you know, in this region. But quite honestly, you know, there was one comment that said, Anna, please name those that failed. And yeah, it's difficult to name. I can't name, because even though this is a safe space to speak, this is going to go on YouTube, and there it's not going to be safe. By saying YouTube, it means, you know, the larger society. So it's not about shaming and naming right now, you know, but it's about, you know, this understanding of there have been failures. And even though the comment also says that, yes, the track 2 in the so-called, you know, track 2 in the peace building process does include, you know, the NGOs speaking about the things that the states don't. But I want to say that a lot of the times NGOs wage the wars that the state does not wage. And that's what happens, you know, on the propaganda level, that happens on, you know, this personal level, you know, on making who's right, who's wrong, and really is not conducive to actually peace building. And I just want to really emphasize, I'm not obsessed about the failures. I don't want to actually emphasize the failures. To the contrary, I'm cognizant of the failures, and thereby I cherish some of the successful work that I did. I don't need to name the people. I don't feel this is going to be safe for all the people involved to name that they have been successful in creating safe platforms for, you know, bringing together Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and actually really doing a very groundwork on, you know, on reconciliation. But, you know, from this far distance and in this obscure manner, I want to really acknowledge all of them and salute.
Thank you, Anna. We have another question, which I will use to make a disclaimer as well. The question says, how often do feminists bring the LGBTQ plus to debates, conversations in Armenia and Azerbaijan? And what is those feminist roadmaps about LGBTQ plus decriminalization socially in the respective countries? And what I wanted to mention was that we are planning to have a specific meeting on the topic of LGBT rights in these two countries. Yeah, so that's just what I wanted to say.
I can jump in and quickly mention that so coming back to the point where we had talk about this collaboration and threatening from Azerbaijan, I personally do not know, and of course if Anna mentions it, probably there have been some cases of you know, threatening possibly, but I personally came across a lot of situations where there have been provocations which really make me sad, and that being said, it made it difficult to further continue the project, or for example build trustworthy relationships, you know, knowing that there is some, you know, provocations in place, or people are, you know, not particularly keen on really working together, but rather again pushing their own agendas. And that being said, for example, I came across cases where I've been part of international projects and stuff where I would see you know, some contributions from Armenian colleagues that would be very you know, one-sided in a way, and that would put picture a bit of a, just provide a different picture sort of in the end for those who are not acquainted with the region or with the conflict as such, and those are many, because we here sort of have some sort of information and understanding about the conflict, but then people out there really possess very little understanding and information about both about the nations and the conflict, and because it's a long-lasting conflict, there are quite a lot of things that even we probably missed or are missing as well, talking about it. And that being said, I think coming to the last question, and that is not answer that is not sort of a that is not sort of to, you know, say Anna was wrong. I was just saying there are also, you know, provocations, and I'm not sure about threats. I have never been threatened, to be honest, but provocations have always been there in my experience. And that being said, I as a feminist, I do talk about LGBTQI community rights and debates and conversations, and our platform is very inclusive. Gender Talks literally is you know, posting and sharing lots of news articles, and my colleague Vahid, actually from Azerbaijan, is here. He's the representative of the queer sort of community in Azerbaijan, and if, as Diego said, if there will be another conversation, so I'll leave it to that. But shortly, I personally do promote it everywhere I can, and anyhow I can. And in my training sessions, I cannot talk about feminism without mentioning LGBTQI community rights and overall the issues and obstacles, etc. So it's very much interrelated. Yeah, interrelated. So it's not possible not to talk about it. Yeah. So very shortly, probably I'll keep it short and sweet.
Yes, about the same question. I mean, of course, many or most of the feminists do understand this intersectional territory that goes with feminism and LGBTQ rights. And that is the reason why often, you know, the nationalists and the organized groups that create this backlash against the feminists always, you know, try to call the names by, let's say, you know, calling feminists as either lesbians or if they're particularly the women, calling them lesbians or protectors of LGBT rights, as if, you know, that's a bad thing to do. But that's how they present, and they succeed in creating sexist rhetoric, in spreading their sexist rhetoric, and by that covering also LGBT people.
Thank you a lot, Anna and Zümrüd. Vahid, do you want to say something? You're muted. Here you go.
Yeah, now hello everyone, and also happy Easter to whoever celebrates it. Yeah, I just wanted to say almost with the similar things happening in Azerbaijan too, with the feminist movement. Like whenever they organize anything, or, you know, just talk about the issues related to domestic violence or Istanbul Convention or anything related to feminism, they're facing the backlash coming from the society, and they're calling names like, you know, immorals, promoting LGBTIs, lesbianism in Azerbaijan. So we are also having some sort of discussions, because most of the feminists are like queer inclusive in Azerbaijan, and they stand for LGBTI rights too. And that's why I'd say the answer to, I'd like just to briefly answer this question, like even though no matter what feminists are having as their background, meaning the ideology, liberal, socialist, or any other, they're all queer inclusive, and also there are always debates in feminist movement, within feminist movement, and also within the society on LGBTI rights, how it is accepted. And every time when feminist movement organize a march or protest, they also include to their statements sexual orientation and gender identity, meaning LGBTI rights. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
May I jump on that question? By the way, just wanted to let the participants and the listeners know that there is a recent research that has been published in Armenia by an organization called Socioscope, which looks into the origins and the even, like, you know, the geographical kind of origins of this anti-gender discourse. They look into the similarities with propagandists in Russia. And so this is an important piece of research that also shows how this anti-feminist and anti-gender discourse is originated, used, abused, you know, the forces behind and stuff like that. But on a general note, I would like to say that I, as a feminist, as an activist, and as a person who cares so much about the queer issue, and who's queer, I see this gender and queer war as a geopolitical thing that is waged on our bodies. And I feel so much pain that sometimes we're not even aware of how we're involved in something that is not even our own war. The war, the struggle against sexism and patriarchy is our war, but the geopolitical aspect of it is not ours. I mean, we don't need to fight that. We don't have to fight that. And there again, I want to emphasize the need for decolonial understanding, decolonial perspective, decolonial lens into our realities.
Thank you, Anna. And well, we don't have any more questions, and we're a little bit of time or planned time. So thank you a lot for your patience and time.
Yeah, I realize we have totally gone over time. I'm really sorry about that to everyone. Yeah, I hope we haven't ruined all your plans too much, but on this note, thanks for coming, Zümrüd, and yeah, for participating. It was really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me and for such an important conversation. And thank you so much for everyone who stayed with us for so long. It was lovely to have you all. Stay safe, please. And yeah, let's continue these talks and conversations in our respective countries, and then also bring it to the international or regional level as well, because the exchange of opinions and experiences is extremely important. I mean, I'm pretty sure what I've shared probably inspired maybe some Armenians, and what Anna shared probably inspired or really helped some Azerbaijanis to understand, you know, or get inspired by their story. So it's vital, it's important, and I'm more than happy to help out, contribute whenever I can and to the possible level. So thank you all so much. And thank you to my colleague Anna for being so honest and so transparent. I really appreciate it.
So do I, Zümrüd. It was a pleasure to talk to you, to meet you firsthand, to talk to you. And by wrapping up, I also want to recognize that I speak from my position based in Yerevan, and it would be so nice to have people from actually the ones living or having lived in Karabakh into this platform. It would be very, very important.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Bye.
And thank you to the people who asked those wonderful questions.
Yeah.
Bye, Zümrüd.
Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Zümrüd. Bye, Anna. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you to my wonderful co-hosts, Arnold and Aidan. And we'll see you all in our next meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.